Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. Today on the podcast, I'm speaking with Lisa Bolton, who experienced multiple losses in her life. She talks about dealing with loss after loss, the intense grieving bringing her to the brink of suicide, and the pivotal importance of her support system. She says, without support, you can't go through it. In her case, she had her church group and a group of mothers who all lost children through drug overdose. In making her loss meaningful, Lisa beautifully describes how she allows her daughter to live through her. Another really important part of our conversation dealt with the topic of comparing losses, especially in the case of blended families dealing with losses on both sides, and the importance of relational support within the family. Here's what she says.
And then when Kerry died and he had made a comment to me and I said, so I knew Kerry for 26. Does it make her loss worse than Quinn's or worse than DJ's? I'm like, no, it doesn't. It makes them all different, but it doesn't make them any less important or it makes them matter any less. They all hurt. They all hurt in a different way. You mourn your way, I mourn my way, but we need to come together as a couple for the kids, for the remaining kids, and for each other, because if we don't support each other, we won't make it.
About this week's guest. Originally from New Jersey, Lisa now lives in Florida. After having been married for 25 years, she divorced and later remarried. She is a mother of 3 biological children, 2 stepchildren, and 1 foster child. But she considers them all hers. She has been an early childhood administrator for almost 40 years. A few years ago, she also became a stillbirth doula, support group facilitator and grief counselor for adults, children and adolescents. Her grief journey began 34 years ago when she lost her firstborn son to miscarriage. 30 years later, she lost her rainbow baby, her beautiful 26-year-old daughter, to an overdose of heroin laced with fentanyl. In between those losses, she also lost her wonderful 18-year-old stepdaughter to a rare autoimmune disease. Everything she does is in memory of her children, carrying on their legacies, making sure their names are said, and their deaths are not in vain. They all mattered, and while making sure they live on, she is also trying to heal her own heart while helping others to heal theirs. Please enjoy today's episode. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for taking time for the podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, Natalie. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Thank you for having your time with me. It's always a blessing for me to understand how people dealt with their loss and their trauma in their lives. So why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your story of loss and trauma?
Well, my loss and trauma goes back about 34 years when I lost my firstborn son, DJ, to a miscarriage. I was 5 months pregnant with him. He was my first. Back then, we're talking back in like 1989, the way hospitals handled miscarriage or stillbirths is a lot different than what they do today. So when I left the hospital, my family wasn't even really accepting of my grief because, I left, I didn't have a baby. And according, that was 5 months into the pregnancy. So they thought, well, you never really had him. And yeah, I did. Mm-hmm. But nobody understood that, including his dad. My ex-husband was, he didn't want to know the sex. He didn't want to know the cause of death. He didn't want to know any of that. But I had a hard time dealing with that. So I had contacted the hospital and I got all the records and I knew his birth weight and his length and that he was a boy. And I never shared that with his dad because he didn't want to know it. And so out of respect, I did that. But in doing that, I buried my own grief because I had nobody to share it with. The one person, his dad, that I should have been able to share that with, he didn't want any part of that. And my family to this day has a hard time when I talk about DJ. They have a hard time acknowledging it. But when my ex-husband and I got divorced after 25 years, and I'm in therapy, and the topic of my son came up, and she's like, you never grieved for him. And I'm like, well, yeah. And she's like, no. I'm like, it's too late. It's been like 20 something odd years. She's like, there is no time limit on grief. And I knew nothing at that point about grief and trauma and delayed grief and all of that. So she's like, there's never a time where you shouldn't feel that you can grieve. So we talked about it. He became the center of a lot of my conversations. We planted a tree. I started talking about his name. And then I think one day my daughter happened to walk in when I saw this article about babies that had been born back at that time, even that early, where they had lied to the parents and used them for research and things like that. And so my paranoid mind was like, oh my God, did you do that to my son? And, totally flipped out. And I was looking through his records and my daughter happened to walk in on me. And I think she was probably 18 or 19 years old at the time. And she's like, who's this? And so I shared the story with her of what happened. And she remembered every single year. She was the only one that called me on DJ's birthday and anniversary. She just 26 years old. She's like, hey, Mom, I know what today is. Are you doing okay? Yeah, thanks for remembering. But it wasn't really, I thought I had covered it with the therapy at that point. And then I met my high school sweetheart and I met back up after 30 years and divorces and got married. And his 18-year-old daughter, my stepdaughter, Quinn, contracted a rare form of autoimmune encephalitis, and she passed away. And it was hard. It was hard to support him because I didn't know that I was still holding on to my own grief over DJ. So when her mother looked at me and got mad at me, and rightfully so, I mean, I understood where she was coming from, but she said, you have no idea what it's like to lose a child. And like out of the depths of my soul, I don't even know where it came from, I screamed at her, yes, I do. I buried a son. And I was like, ooh, where did that come from? Called my counselor up. I'm like, okay, so there's a problem. I may not be done with your services yet.
So wait a second, to get the timeline right, you said that first time you basically looked at DJ's loss and your grief, that was 20 years after he was born.
Yeah, Quinn was 20 years after he was born. Quinn was in 2015.
So basically when you said that you met the therapist and you looked at your, and she said that was like 20 years later when you got divorced, or 25?
Well, we were married for 25. So it was about 20 years after, DJ was born and lost that I finally confronted that grief.
So that was the first time that you were actually dealing and understanding that was grief.
Mm-hmm. I called somebody, I had called a nurse, I called a nurse up and she had told me a story about a couple who had been married for 50 years and went through the same problem the same situation with their daughter that I had gone through with DJ. And she said they wanted to make peace with her death because they hid it, because I guess they weren't married and, 50 years prior to that was, a no-no. And they put a monument up for her at the hospital and they dealt with her death 50 years after the fact. So the nurse had said to me, if you want to do something like that, we can. I'm like, no, I'm fine. And then 2015, we lose Quinn, and all of that, like what I thought I had let out, that delayed grief or that repressed grief, however you want to, whatever terminology you want to use, came out tenfold. Like I couldn't concentrate. So my daughter was by my side a lot. She was helping me through it. And at the time, I didn't realize that she was struggling with substance use disorder. And she had just lost her stepsister and she's trying to help her mom keep it together. And there was a lot of grieving and anticipatory grief with what Carrie was going through with her drug use, because I knew that there was probably going to be a day that I got that phone call. And in January of 2019, I got the phone call. And my daughter was my best friend. She was my entire world. I have a stepdaughter and another living son, but Carrie was my everything. We did everything together.
Take a moment, Lisa, because I just think that people listening are also taking in a lot of information. And you just shared, in a matter of 7 minutes, you just shared 3 losses. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of people listening here, they have their losses and they're dealing with taking in that news. So I want to give your also and your children and your stepchildren a moment in this podcast to be recognized.
Yeah, every loss has been hard, and I've grieved all 3 of them in all different ways. But Carrie's loss was the most devastating. of my life, you know. And I lost my best friend when we were teenagers, and my grandmother, who was my rock when I was pregnant with my youngest. But nothing could have compared me to the pain of losing her.
So how many years was between your stepdaughter and your daughter, just for a reference of time?
Quinn died in September of 2015, and Carrie died in January of 2019.
Okay. Wow.
And I was with her for 2 weeks. I was with her for a week. She went back up to, I'm in Florida. She went back up to New Jersey to get some things together, because she was going to move back down here with me. And I talked to her 24 hours before she died. Like, I hung up the phone at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and at 5 a.m. the next day, I got the phone call that she was gone. And I always knew when she was struggling, and she didn't give me any indication. So it's been ruled as an accidental overdose, but the heroin was laced with fentanyl, and we have a huge problem in this country with fentanyl use and fentanyl poisoning, and she is just one of the many victims of it.
So she had a drug abuse for years. So you were saying before that I was expecting that call. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about what that means as a mother to be dealing with?
I have family members that are police officers, so they deal with this all the time. And they kind of took the stance when she first started using. She struggled for about 5 years with substance use disorder. And when it first happened, you know, my one brother would say, "You're going to get the call, you're going to put her in a pine box someday." And it was very cruel, you know, but it was also something that he dealt with as a police officer for his entire career. And like, my sister-in-law was like, "Just be her brother. Stop being a cop. Be her brother, because she needs you right now." And that statement went back when I first found out about Carrie's disorder, stuck with me for those 5 years. So that's when every time the phone rang, every time a New Jersey area code came up, every time I heard of somebody else in her circle that had passed away, I went into this tailspin and this panic, like, I'm going to be next. I'm going to get that phone call. But she had been here with me, and she had been in recovery for a while, and she had been doing so well, Natalie, that when I got the phone call, I think I had let my guard down. So I didn't really expect it. Even though I expected it, I didn't expect it, because I had just talked to her and she was fine.
That must be very traumatic.
It has been. But now everything I do is, you know, when Carrie first found out about DJ, I had decided to become a stillbirth doula, and she was very supportive of that. And we were going to do a nonprofit together. I'm still going to put the nonprofit together, but now it's in memory of all of them. And it's kind of, the mission has kind of changed because my grief and my life have changed so dramatically. But it's going to be called the Dandelion Project. And I just want to share that for a second, because when I was becoming a stillbirth doula, one of the moms that I was talking to had said, you know, your mission, what you're talking about is like, reminds me of like a dandelion that spreads its seeds. You want to spread love. And I'm like, she's like, you should call it the Dandelion Project. I'm like, all right, well, I'll think about it. And Carrie used to doodle a lot at night. She was a very gifted artist. And she doodled one night and she made a dandelion, and she sent it to me at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to strangle her because she woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. But when I opened it up and I saw the dandelion, I called her and I said, "Did I tell you what I wanted to name this?" And she's like, "No." And I'm like, "Honey, I want to call it the Dandelion Project." And she just was beside herself. So her actual drawing is the logo, and we put it on a canvas for every event that we do for Overdose, and we auction it off. The moms put fingerprint hearts on it, and we auction it off. And it's, for me, that is such a healing thing, because my daughter's vision and my daughter's artwork, you know, it's a dandelion, but still is out there, and it's at every event, and it's at everything that I do. And she's getting the message across. You know, it's her legacy that I do this for. It's DJ and Quinn's legacy, so that nobody else has to suffer alone, like I did for 20 years with him, and then another few, and then exploding on, you know, my stepdaughter's mother, because I couldn't handle my own grief.
So how did you deal with your grief and loss early on?
I mean,
meaning you have different losses, and you've reacted to them in a different way. So the only person that I'm always saying to my clients that can compare any losses is the person who's experienced the loss, to compare their own losses. And it's only ever going to be helpful if that is to a purpose that is good. But for the purpose of understanding, for people to understand and also maybe mirror their own way of dealing with their loss, you alluded a little bit about how you didn't deal at the beginning over DJ, or you didn't actually grieve. And then you also explained how you exploded into your stepdaughter's mom's face about when it suddenly came out. But in terms of your own daughter, when she died in 2019, how did you deal with her loss?
Oh, God. In all honesty, I didn't even want to live anymore. I'll be honest. I mean, I look at my other children, I look at my husband, and I think, well, I can't do that to them because that would be an awful legacy to leave them. But at the same time, in those early months, all I wanted to do was be with her, and people said, you'll see her again. I never blamed God. I never blamed Carrie for what happened, but I wasn't going to church at the time. And then a very good friend of mine brought me to a new church down here. That's nothing like the Roman Catholic Church I was brought up in. And they have become such a support group and such a family for me that I truly believe that I will see her again. I will get to hold her again. I will get to talk to her again. I feel her spirit with me all the time. But that took a long time. I couldn't work. I couldn't eat. I made myself so sick that I actually lost teeth from throwing up constantly because it ruined my teeth. Mm-hmm. I lost about 40 pounds afterwards. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't a healthy situation.
So what brought you out of that phase? What helped you get out of the dark night where you wanted to join her?
The people that I have met, my church family, the support group moms that we have for overdose, we are more than just moms that share our grief. We've become a family. And we support each other and we hold each other up, and we know that we can call one another like, hey, I am having a really bad day. Talk me down, and we do that for each other. There's a core group of us that just always have each other's back. And if it wasn't for those ladies, I probably wouldn't be here, in all honesty.
How about your family? How did they deal with the loss and your different losses?
Well, DJ, my first husband was the father of both DJ and Carrie. And he didn't deal with DJ's loss at all. He didn't want to talk about him. He didn't want to deal with it. He didn't want to even remember that we had one before Carrie. He has had a very difficult time, and we don't talk. We're not very close, which is a shame because of the kids, but it is what it is. When I saw him after she died, he was just beside himself. He was falling apart. He wasn't the man that I knew for all those years. And somebody looked at me and actually said to me, I don't know how you're doing it, but you are so strong. Because I tried not to, I didn't cry. I was taking care of everybody because that's what I do. I'm a fixer. I take care of people. So I was trying to take care of everybody at her service until I sat down at the casket myself and thought, this is mine. She's mine. I'm not going to do this again. And I remember nobody in the family really wanting to give that speech or that goodbye at the service. And I didn't want to, but I read an essay that she had written in high school. I have to tell you that Carrie was a 4.0 college graduate. She had a BA in forensic psychology. She was not just a gifted artist, but a writer too. So she had written this thing back when she was a senior in high school. And I hadn't seen it for years until I called my girlfriend and went, I don't know. How do I say goodbye to her? I don't know how to do this. I never had a chance to say goodbye to DJ. Quinn wasn't biologically mine. So me saying goodbye to Quinn was much different. As much as I loved her and I mourn her and I grieve her, it's a much different feeling. Does that make sense? Than my own two biological ones. Doesn't mean that I miss her any less. It just means I miss her differently. And all of a sudden, Carrie's speech was on the top of the pictures that I was looking for. So I took that as a sign that I had to read that. And I read it to her, and I did it myself. And I stood up there, and I remember looking at her in the casket and saying, I brought you into this world by myself, and I will send you home by myself. And nobody came up with me. I wouldn't let anybody stand with me. And I kept looking down at her dad and her brother and her stepsister, who were beside themselves. And, my stepdaughter is pretty good with the loss. She talks about it. She was very close to Carrie. Sometimes I think she was closer to Carrie than she was to Quinn. My son actually found Carrie the night she died. So he has a lot of trauma and a lot of sibling guilt and all that. And her dad, from what I understand, is a very depressed man right now. Her stepfather grieves right alongside with me. We grieve them all together. Even though he never knew DJ, he still understands that is a loss of mine, and it's still a child of mine.
So in total, if I counted right, you have 4 children.
Yes.
You. So, and also your stepdaughter now has lost...
5 if you count DJ, so 3 of my own and 2 step, yes.
Okay, and so also your stepdaughter has now lost her stepsister and her sister, if I counted that correctly. There's a lot of interesting parts about this, is also in terms of the loss of a blended family. Mm-hmm. And I actually just thought about that in regards to another conversation that I'm going to have about the difference it makes to biological parents to mourn the loss of their child versus a blended family. How did that play out in your family, given that you had all these different losses at different times? How did that affect you as a blended family, you and your now husband? Well,
we had some difficulty when Quinn first died, because he just went into a complete tailspin for about 2 years. And I really didn't understand a father's grief, because DJ's dad had never done that. Like I didn't experience a father's grief with my children's father. Mm-hmm. And so when my husband went into that downward spiral with my stepdaughter, I was at a loss. I'm like, I don't know how to handle this. I don't know how to help him. And, anything that I would say, sometimes I was made to feel like, well, she wasn't your daughter. She was mine. And it wasn't meant, it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't meant. It was just the way he was grieving. And I've learned a lot about a father's grief in the last 4 years or the last 6 years, and I don't think that I handled it right with him either, because there was parts of me that said, when he said, you don't understand, I'm like, I lost a son. Of course I understand. And there was sometimes that it was like, well, he was a baby and she was 18. And I'm like, so that makes your loss worse than mine. And so sometimes that would cause a conflict, and then when Carrie died and he had made a comment to me and I said, so I knew Carrie for 26. Does it make her loss worse than Quinn's or worse than DJ's? I'm like, no, it doesn't. It makes them all different, but it doesn't make them any less important, or it makes them matter any less. They all hurt. They all hurt in a different way. You mourn your way, I mourn my way, but we need to come together as a couple for the kids, for the remaining kids, and for each other, because if we don't support each other, we won't make it. And, we saw a counselor for a little while and we talked about it, and he still has some difficulty talking about it and, sharing, but I know I can read him now. So I know, like, when it's coming up on her birthday or an anniversary, and it's whether it's mine or his, or it's just, like this June would be 6 years since we went on vacation with her. I can see that, and I can see the breakdown and the meltdown starting, and I'm able to head that off for him like he is for me now.
I think you made a couple of really interesting points of differentiation. First of all, if we're just looking at father's grief, and you described, just from your position, from your perspective, DJ's father's grief and your now husband's father grief. From my understanding and what I've written in my first book, there's a difference between people grieving, and then there's also what is called male grieving and female grieving, but not necessarily that male grieve that way and female. It's just termed like that, more of a cognitive griever, more of an emotional griever. But it's important to understand that people grieve individually different, and we cannot really just put them in a box and say, this is how you do it, but we can see trends. And one of the beautiful things that I have learned in episode 1, I did one podcast episode with my ex-husband where we, on the 11th anniversary or death anniversary of our daughter, we reflected on our grief. And because of the time we took to record the podcast, we spoke about things, and he shared things that he never shares otherwise because he's not an expressive griever. And I mean, this is my profession and this is my passion as well. So I'm an expressive, I talk about things and I like to delve deep in those topics, but not everyone likes that. And another person comes into my mind. She was interviewed for the first book as well. And she said, as much as it was important for me to grieve openly and to speak about, she lost twins, girls. She said, as much as it was impossible for my husband to speak about it. So for him, that was more difficult to speak. For me, it was more difficult not to speak. And I think so what your story highlights is the differences in, let's say, father's grief that it can have, but also then on another level is the story of comparison of griefs, of losses, as you were saying. Does a baby mean less grief than an 18-year-old or a 26-year-old more than an 18? And as we know, the grief is not relating to the age of the child, but more to the meaning and the personal history that someone has and the relationship that you have with that person that you lost. And that means you could grieve the loss of someone that you didn't even know personally, because there's a meaning maybe attached to that person. So I think it's important to make those distinctions and for people to hear that as well, to validate their own grief, no matter the person, no matter the time that they spent with them. Another thing which I found really interesting when I was talking to my editor of my book, who lived in Africa for some years, he said that, for example, people, certain cultures in Africa, they grieve past and not potential. What that means is for someone that hasn't lived for a long time, they would grieve less because they haven't a lived experience with that person. Right. So a baby who died, the grief is less experienced than an 80-year-old person because they grieve the life that they have rather than we in the Western culture, or I don't know how broad I want to take it, but we grieve both. We grieve potential and past. So for us, the unlived milestones that we don't have with our children, that's also part of grief.
Yes, I grieve with DJ. I think my grief was more focused on, like, what would he have been? If he had survived, would Carrie still have survived? What would he look like? Because the other two look like their dad. Would this one at least look like me? Those kind of things. And so I grieve for what I didn't have. I grieve for the fact that I didn't have his first footsteps or his kindergarten goodbye or any of that. And with Carrie and Quinn, I grieve. Well, with Quinn, I grieve the time that I never had with her because I didn't meet her until she was a teenager. So I missed all of those, and then I grieve for the time that I've lost that I'll never have with her. And with Carrie, I grieve past, present, and future. So, there's that difference too, and like you were saying with the husbands and wives, John, my husband, is I think a cognitive griever too. Like he's not very emotional. He will tear up with me if I'm really, really upset. But if we're talking about any of them, he will, there's like almost like a time limit. Like he looks at his watch and he's like, okay, 5 minutes is up. You need to stop talking about this and we need to move on. And then he'll go into something that is so far away from what was going on. But I think that's just his way of grieving. But I wouldn't know that back then with their dad because I didn't understand it. And I've learned so much. And, and I know that that's part of my purpose and my mission still being here, and why those feelings of I just want to be with Carrie can't exist, because I'm not done here and she has to live through me, if that makes sense.
So tell us a little bit more how you allow her, or how you allow yourself to have Carrie live through you. I think that's a beautiful way to make your life meaningful. Well,
even when she was in active addiction, she always wanted to make a difference. She always wanted to help, sometimes to her own detriment. But everything that we do in the support groups and the events and the functions, it's her legacy. It's not mine, it's hers, because these are the things that she would want me to do. These are the things that she would do if she was still here. And if I don't feel right about it, then I know she's not giving me the thumbs up. And even like with the infant loss stuff that I do, it's the same with DJ. Like, I'll hear sometimes, and I hope people don't think I'm crazy, but I'll hear something. Yeah, no, not this one. You're not doing this. So everything, and there's not a whole lot of information out there about what Quinn died from, but we loop her in with all of the child loss stuff that we do. So when I walk when I walk for my children, I walk for all three of them. I wear a purple ribbon for her, a pink and a blue ribbon for him, and I wear a red and zebra one for Quinn, because I've lost all of them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's how they live on. And just, Carrie is on a banner, and they went to the wall in Arizona for the wall that they're putting up. I'm sure you know about that.
Tell our listeners about it.
There is because of the cartels coming in with the drugs, when President Trump was in office, he started to build a wall. And when President Biden got in, unfortunately, the building stopped. So a couple of the organizations went down to the wall and hung all these banners. There's 150 faces on a banner, and there was over 20 banners. And Carrie was on one of them. And and friends of mine, their kids, and I could hear Carrie saying, "I made it to Arizona." So she's out there, her face on that banner, on that wall with those Texas Rangers. That made a difference. She is now, there was an art show. There's a woman that does portraits. And she was in Florida here in the Orlando Historical Society. She was one of 42 faces that were featured for Overdose. So there she is, making a difference. DJ's name is out there for every infant and child loss, and Quinn as much as I can. But then Carrie is on a van or a trailer that goes around. There's her picture. And currently this week we started, there is a billboard with 20 faces on it, and my daughter is one of them. So when you're driving down the main street in our town, you look up and there's Carrie, and she's making a difference. And if nothing else ever happens, if she never goes on another billboard or another banner or whatever, she's been all around. And that's how she lives through me, because she's making the difference. It's because of her that I do what I do. And it's her mission and her vision and her face that's up there. And I'm just the spokesperson.
I'm still interested in the fact that, I work with people that are in early grief, and they're devastated and they don't see a point in living. And so you've described that. And there's something that happened from there to where you are now, where you allow yourself to live a vibrant life as much as you can and have your children live through you and have a purposeful life. And you've mentioned some of the resources, and I'm just curious as to what else besides the church, or let's maybe say someone is not into church, or what do you think that has contributed to making that shift from despair to purpose, from surviving to thriving? What if you could tease out for the people listening to give them hope, what would that be?
Support of others who know what you're going through, support of others who are standing in your shoes. And for me, watching my now friends and family that are going through the same thing, I know, like when I sat down and talked, one of the moms who had also lost her son to fentanyl poisoning came out and told me that she also lost a baby. So there's that bond there, that there's that trust, and there's that bond that, this is the person, this is my go-to person. This is who I can talk to. You have to, I can't stress it enough, have support, because without the support, you can't do it. You can't do it. And when Carrie first died, one of the moms that was very supportive, I had just become a support group facilitator, and the organization has a strict rule, 2 years out of grief before you can counsel somebody else. When Carrie died, I think it was like 3 months later, and I looked at my friend Margaret and I said, "No, I need to start." And she's like, "No." I'm like, "No, I'm fine." She's like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "It's been 3 months. You're not fine." I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I want to do this." And she's like, "You're not fine. Trust me on this. I've got your back, and I'm not letting you go down this way." And about 2 weeks later, I probably called her up and went, "I can't do this. You're right. I wasn't ready." And she's like, "I know. Where are we meeting?" And that's the kind of support, like you step back and you know that it's coming. Like when we do it to others, we know that it's coming and we just wait. But we make it so that we all know that we're available for each other, that we're not going down alone, because we've got this wonderful support group behind us to hold us up. And a lot of families don't have it with their families, which is something that I was lacking. Still, even with Carrie, my family, it's easier for them not to talk about her loss than it is to talk about her. And I get it. It was their granddaughter or their daughter or whatever. But for me, I have to talk about them. I have to talk about all three of them, because that's the way I survive.
How did you find the support? Like people will wonder, but where do I find the support? I mean, in your case, it's substance abuse. How did you find the people that you say at the beginning supported you and then later you supported others? How did you find the avenues to go?
I am in various support groups. I am a chapter leader for the Tears Foundation, which does, infant and pregnancy loss. And through her, I met some other people. And then I joined one group for substance use disorder. And I met my friend Mary Beth. And we were talking one night and we realized how many things we had in common, from our second marriages to our youngest kids to the ones that we lost dying a month apart from each other. And she was my lifeline. And she actually has an event every year in honor of Ryan. And the year after Carrie died, she talked me into participating in the event. And that's where I met all these other people. And it's just such a bond. And it's just, I can't stress that enough, that without these ladies in my life, I don't know where I would be today.
And I think to bring this around is also important for people to hear that it doesn't have to be the people that you expect to support you. It might not be your family. It might not be the people that you feel close to. They might not be able to support you because they're dealing with their own. And we're going to put all the links with the support groups that you mentioned. So if someone feels called to look that up, go into the show notes and you'll find all the links. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been an inspiration to speak to you and to see your resilience that managed to bring this around, to bring so much hope to other people in those situations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
How about we finish up with the rapid fire questions?
All right.
So as people listening to this know, it's just a sentence starter, which you are going to finish with what comes up in a moment. So grieving and trauma means?
Not being able to catch your breath, not being able to concentrate, not being able to focus, feeling hopeless, feeling like there's just nothing left to live for.
And healing means?
Finding meaning, finding purpose.
And what I have learned about myself in the light of loss and trauma?
That I'm a lot stronger than I thought I was.
I think that's the answer that I heard most of the time. That's interesting. I just realized. And one thing I wish people knew about loss and trauma?
There's no time limit on grief. There's no right or wrong way to do it. There's no right or wrong way. Like we were saying with the different ages with loss, there's a difference, but there's not really a difference between the way a mom or a dad or a grandparent or a sibling, because we all grieve differently, but we all grieve.
And one thing that has changed since your losses and trauma that you wouldn't want to miss, what would that be?
The ability to get out there and find purpose and make a difference and help others so that they never have to feel like I felt the way I felt after DJ died, or Quinn or Carrie.
Thank you so much for bringing this hope to people listening to this and the way you support others. It's been such an inspiration speaking to you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.